Good evening all, and welcome. Before the video begins, it is the final few hours of the Black Friday sale, so if you want any of the new merch with the discount code, feel free to get it now. But without further ado, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. This took place in San Francisco in the early 90s. I was a 33-year-old female living alone there. I had a good job, and I was very interested in real estate. I decided to walk to a neighborhood grocery store to pick up a real estate magazine. That's what you did back then. We didn't really have the internet yet. It was a rare, warm evening in San Francisco, and there were quite a few people walking around outside. I was walking behind a group of about 5 or 6, apparently unrelated people. At least, they weren't talking to each other. So that is what I assumed. I'm rather short, so all I could really see were their backs. When suddenly, without a single word from any of them, they all turned around and started walking back in the direction we had just come from. I was a bit amazed by this, and turned to look at them, sort of shrugged it off, and kept going in my original direction. As I turned my head, I was stunned to see a man was just in front of me pointing a gun, grinning like a madman. He was about my height, wearing those green mechanic's overalls covered head to toe in grease and dirt. Startled, I was just about 2 feet from him, and my gut reaction was just to continue going forward, so I passed him with every muscle in my body tense, heart racing, and kept walking. To my dismay, I heard his footsteps following me. Then he started whispering, "Oh, are you bad, huh? Why don't you run?" At that moment, my mind seized on the belief that he was waiting for me to run before he shot me in the back. He seemed to want it so badly, so I was determined to do the opposite. I kept walking, expecting to feel a bullet slam into my spine at any moment. That shot didn't come, and I believed then and now that if I had run, that would have given him the piece of his fantasy that he needed, if that makes sense. I headed up a hill and around a corner to a gas station with people in it. It was dark already, and when I turned around, he was gone. This happened in 2012, and there are not many people I've shared this story with. For my birthday in 2012, me and my ex-husband visited Krakow for a short break. My main interest was to visit Auschwitz and the Jewish quarter of the city, and Schindler's factory, which is now a museum. We arrived just prior to the Christmas market's opening. I remember being disappointed that we wouldn't be able to experience this. We stayed in a very nice hotel. I won't divulge the name, but it was around 15 minutes away from the main square and cloth market. We had a beautiful balcony over the river, and it was a very lovely hotel with hospitable staff. We flew in on a cheap budget flight around mid-afternoon, showered, changed, and got ready to explore. The weather was cold and dreary, with some light drizzle, but more than okay to walk along the river into Krakow main city. Krakow is an exceptionally beautiful city, and I loved it. We had a good look at the cloth market, ate a meal of matzo balls and stew in the main square under blankets and heated lights, and watched the famous clock tower, and even managed to visit the lovely shopping center with excellent shops, where I purchased a lovely cashmere coat from Zara, and an equally important lovely hat and scarf, which are important details for later. Given it was our first night, we had a few drinks, which turned into a few more. We ended our evening in a lovely bar beneath the city, as most bars appear to be underground and in the catacombs. I was overjoyed. As a smoker, we're usually social lepers, but we could still smoke cigarettes in this bar. Around 1 a.m., we were tired, and decided to head home to our comfy hotel. We made our way up the stairs from the bar to street level, and a taxi ramp was right outside. We jumped in a taxi and let the driver know the location of our hotel. Unfortunately, the driver would only accept cash, so we explained that we would need to get to a cash point at some point along the 5-minute journey to the hotel. He seemed to understand and was fine with this. At this point, I needed to make you know that I had no mobile phone with me. It was back in the hotel. In those days, roaming had to be paid for, so we decided we would only take my ex-husband's phone. It was 2012. I think I only had an iPhone 3S and it was due for renewal anyway, and the 5-minute journey was uneventful. We arrive opposite to our hotel, which is kind of a dual carriageway with a petrol station and cash points on opposite sides. My ex-husband signaled the driver to pull in to use the cash point and exited the taxi. As my ex-husband was in the cash point, my nightmare began. As soon as he dropped him off and seeing he was withdrawing money, the taxi driver locked all the doors and sped off. I was in the back seat with several shopping bags and had no idea what was going on. The taxi driver took the main dual carriageway out of the city and kept on speeding. Initially, I thought he was looking for a place to turn around and pick up my ex-husband, but this wasn't the case. The taxi driver continues to speed until we were out of the city limits. He spoke no English, and I asked if he wanted money. I showed him my empty bags and shopping bags and asked him what was going on. At this point I was scared, but I assumed there was a misunderstanding. Once the taxi driver continued past the Krakow outskirts, I was terrified. The outskirts of Krakow are rural. No street lights, just black and snow and ice. The taxi driver shouted at me, but I couldn't understand a word. Eventually, he pushed me physically and forced me with my head into the back seat and told me, I can only assume, to shut up. He then started talking on the phone with a man. The journey carried on for another 20 minutes until we arrived to what appeared to be an industrial estate. No houses, some street lights, but the whole area was just a warehouse of factories and fields. The taxi driver was still on his phone, sounding angry, then abruptly turned off the car. By this point, I was petrified. I can honestly say I have never been so scared in all my life. I was praying and begging that my life wouldn't end here. 34, the mother of 5-year-old twins, and ending up dead in a lockup on an industrial estate as some sort of mutilated rape victim. For about 30 seconds, it was quiet, apart from my sobbing and begging. Then the taxi driver got out, came around the back door, grabbed me and threw me on the side of the road. He grabbed the shopping bags and hurled it at me, got in the taxi, and drove off. The relief never came, as I was sure he was going to get other men to harm me or do terrible things to me. I gathered myself up. It was probably -8 Celsius in late November and snowing heavily, and looked for some kind of doorway, a hedge or any kind of shelter, bearing in mind I was just left here outside an industrial estate. I walked some meters away and found a gap in a hedge and sat down, pulled my coat and bags around me and cried my heart out. I have no idea how long I was there, maybe an hour, maybe 2, but the sky started to get light, and a few cars and vans came past me. I tried to flag someone down, but it was no good. I sat back down. I was frozen. I can honestly say, I think I was dying and had no more energy left. All I know is that some lovely Polish people turned up at around 5 a.m. I was sprawled across the road, hard shoulder, and a brother and sister going to the market with their cattle stopped and picked me up, dragged me to their truck, and put a big, cow poo-stained jacket around me. I couldn't speak, apparently. I was just trying to talk to my children, and they found out my location from a napkin in my bag. These wonderful people drove me 20 miles back to Krakow to my hotel, where my ex-husband, police, the hotel owner, manager, and the Polish equivalent of the CID were all in the process of setting up a command center. They dropped me off, still wearing the poo-stained jacket. They were questioned and went back on their way to the market. I never even got their names. I was swabbed, photographed, and fingerprinted, etc., and got a stiff brandy from the bar. The following day, we visited Auschwitz-Birkenau, the main reason for the Krakow trip. That evening, we were taken by police to the taxi rank, where I had got the taxi from, to try and identify the driver, but he wasn't there. It was left with Polish police. But dear God, I must have had someone looking out for me that night. This happened in the late 80s, when I was home one summer on break from college. About 2 years prior, my dad had purchased an old house with the intention of eventually tearing it down to build a new one. The house was built in 1916, and like most homes built in that era, it had a really unconventional floor plan. There was a central living room and kitchen like any normal home, but the 3 bedrooms were more akin to separate apartments. Each had its own separate outside entrance, a private bathroom, and a door that led to a common living area and kitchen. Perhaps the place was originally intended to be a boarding house or something. I really don't know. The other thing that was a little creepy about the house was that it was all wood. The ceilings, the walls, the floors were all brown, with nothing ever being painted nor plastered. My dad was a pretty cool guy. While he was waiting for permits and financing, he let 3 of my friends live there for free in exchange for watching the place. They had a lot of parties, but my dad didn't care as long as none of the neighbors complained. I went to a few of the parties there myself, when I was lucky enough to be home from college, that is. Eventually, 2 of my friends moved out, leaving my one buddy there to watch the mostly empty house on his own. He was not the type of person to be afraid of living alone in a half-empty house, so he was fine with the situation. I'm at home one afternoon when the phone rings. It's my buddy, and he sounds terrified. He asks me to call the police and meet him out in front of the driveway of the house, but to under no conditions go in. I ask him why, and he tells me there is a crazy clown in the house. Apparently he was sick with the flu in bed for the previous 2 days. When he finally felt well enough to go into the kitchen to get something to eat, he runs face to face with a crazy woman dressed in a clown suit and makeup who starts screaming at him. It was then that he ran out of the house and called me in a panic from a nearby gas station. I call the police and then drive over to the house, which was 2 miles away. That's where I find my buddy, on the sidewalk out in front, really shaken up. I ask him to describe what he saw, and he keeps saying there's a crazy clown woman in the house. I ask for more specific details, and he describes her as dressed in a white clown suit with red makeup smeared all over her face. He's still a little sick, and he looks really bad, and honestly, he's really freaking me out as well. There's no way in hell I was going to go into that house to investigate his story. After what seems like an eternity, the cops show up. My buddy tells them the exact same story, and the cops then go inside the house while we wait outside. After 5 minutes, they emerge escorting a crazy clown woman who looks exactly as my friend described her, with her wild, unkempt brown hair, wearing this all-white body jumper suit. But what was really disturbing was her face. She had a tube of lipstick which she had crudely spread red all over her cheeks in a failed attempt to make them look rosy. Although we were both freaked out, the cops thought it was hilarious. The clown woman claimed it was her house and then accused us of being on drugs and trespassing on her property. When the cops told her to get in the back of the squad car, he warned him that she had powerful friends in Tinseltown who would have him fired. When he comes back to talk to us, he tells us he can't arrest her for breaking and entering because the house was half abandoned. He said the best he could do was drive for a few blocks away in the hope she didn't wander back. This, of course, freaked us out even more. Fortunately, though, when they run a background check on her, it turns out she has an outstanding warrant and would be going to jail instead. And that was the last time we saw her. When we go back into the house, we find all kinds of crazy stuff written on the kitchen cabinets in the same red lipstick that she had rubbed all over her face. There was also some 10-day-old fish in the fridge that my friend never got around to eating, that she cooked on the stove and ate. The really scary thing was that this crazy woman was in the same house with my friend for at least a day while he was sick and semi-delirious in bed with fever. She was probably harmless, but who knows what she would have done if she had stumbled upon him while he was sleeping. His door was unlocked the entire time. Fortunately, she never did as far as we're aware. One of the things she wrote on the cabinets in lipstick was her name. While I'm not allowed to disclose it here, I actually Googled her and found a mugshot of her that was taken some years later. This happened way back in the 1980s. I was 5 years old, and I was invited to a neighbor's birthday party. We lived in the quiet suburbs of Baltimore, Maryland. It was an idyllic town. Trees lined the streets, looking over the neighborhood like giant looming sentinels. It was early October. The houses were decorated for Halloween, and the boys' parents had pulled out all the stops to make sure their son's party was one to remember. There was a slow-moving, sad-faced donkey that the smaller children were permitted to ride. I, being a fat boy at age 5, was not allowed to ride the donkey. I was also very loud, and it was my loud mouth that caused this pleasant afternoon of cake, ice cream, and piñata to quickly unravel into a horrifying nightmare. Aside from the usual entertainment at a 7-year-old's party, there was a clown. The clown walked around silently, prancing and smiling. He would laugh silently. He would do the old, "I got your nose" trick, and pull coins out from behind our ears. He made balloon animals and attempted to ride a unicycle. The other kids laughed. I hated the clown. Everything about him made me uncomfortable, and because of this, my fat 5-year-old self decided it was a decent idea to give the clown a hard time. The birthday boy announced aloud that it was time to head inside to see the special clown magic show. All the kids went into the living room and sat on the hardwood floor. I stood in the back. The clown proceeded with the magic show. He pulled a fake rabbit out of his hat and performed other hat tricks. As I stood in the back of the room and jeered him, I would yell out how the tricks were done. The clown continued to silently smile, making no sound as he went about his magical presentation. His face said happiness, but his eyes screamed rage at me. This went on for 15 minutes. The kids laughed as the clown fumbled through some crappy dime store magic tricks. I do not know if it was an act of mercy, but the birthday boy's parents shouted, "Piñata time!" and all the kids ran outside to smash a cardboard donkey stuffed with candy. After a few minutes outside, all of the fruit punch I had drunk throughout the day wanted out, so I scurried back into the house in search of the toilet. The house was quiet, and the sun had shifted in the sky, leaving the kitchen and the adjoining hallway bathed in a murky, early evening light. As I walked through the kitchen and into the hall, from another room in the hall stepped the clown and into the hallway. He stood there staring at me, and I stared at him. It seemed like one of those Wild West showdowns from the cowboy movies, except he was a clown and I was a 5-year-old. He slowly turned towards me, his painted smile unwavering, but his eyes were bloodshot and filled with unbridled hatred. "Hey, piggy piggy." I walked a few steps in reverse before spinning on my heels and trying to make it to the kitchen. I felt a large hand land on my shoulder, and I was spun around forcefully and fell to the floor. The clown stood above me for a moment before putting a giant clown shoe on my fat chest. I remember trying to squirm. I remember wanting to scream and cry for help, but it never happened. He stood over me, pinning me to the floor before brandishing one of those old-style seltzer bottles, and proceeded to spray the crotch of my pants in a sing-song voice, "Piggy going pee-pee," until the contents of the bottle were drained. When he removed his foot from my chest, I lashed out with my feet, kicking at his shins and trying to scurry away. I ran into a pantry and slammed the door. It was really a terrible hiding place. He had seen where I went. The pantry was about 4 feet away from where I was laying on the floor just moments ago. It was dark in the pantry and smelled of Pine Sol cleaning solvent. There was no lock on the door inside to protect me from the clown. In the dark pantry, I slid to the floor and tried not to sob uncontrollably. Minutes passed. They felt like hours. I heard no sound other than my wheezing and a fear fart that squeaked out. "Oh, Piggy, did you make poopy in the pantry?" The voice came inside the dark pantry in which I was hiding. Or so I thought. I froze in fear, not moving, not breathing. I did not know where the clown was, if he was in the pantry with me, but I needed to get out. If he was there, I needed to stay in. I lowered my head to the floor, and squinting through the gap between the bottom of the pantry door and the floor, there wasn't much to see. What little light bled through the bottom was quickly blacked out by a bloodshot eye staring back at me from the other side of the door. There was a low, guttural laugh, and a voice that either hissed, "Boo, Piggy," or "Pooh, Piggy." I squeezed my eyes shut and started crying at near hysterical level. The door swung open, and I screamed as loudly as I could. But standing in the doorway was my dad. "What the hell are you doing?" he asked. "Clown!" I screamed. He carried me out of the pantry and out of the house and back to the safety of our own house. Let me give you some background. At the time of this story, I was 23. I'm only 5'2" and weigh about 170 pounds. I had just moved to Jackson, Tennessee from Miami, Florida, because I had just gotten out of an extremely physically, emotionally, and mentally abusive relationship that lasted 3 years. About sometime in June, my current boyfriend and I had been doing trips pretty much every weekend. We would visit a new hiking and waterfall area, and although there isn't a nightlife, Tennessee is amazingly beautiful. We went to this place called Narrows of the Harpeth. This was one of the underwhelming places we've been to, but still relaxing. After we found a cool place to sit and swim after hiking for 2 hours, a few shots and one blunt later, it was time to make the hour trip back to Jackson. I put my shoes back on, slipped my dress back on, which is a little bit above the knee length, like if I bend down too far my bum will be on display. I own my body and sexuality, so showing skin never really bothered me, and I didn't really think about it, because I just expect people to respect me as I respect them, and the way they dress. On the way back to the car, I being the tipsy dumbass I am, I managed to trip and fall and scrape my leg pretty badly. It actually scarred now. I tell my boyfriend that we need to go back to Walmart once in Jackson so that I could thoroughly clean my wound with hydrogen peroxide and Neosporin. My boyfriend says okay. An hour later, we're at the Walmart. Mind you, it's about 9 p.m. going on 10, not late by any means. So we get what I need, but because I'm still a bit tipsy and pretty high from the blunt I'd finished in the car ride home, I get distracted very easily. And remembered that my boyfriend got me the wrong size case for my iPhone 11 Pro. He got Max instead. I wanted an idea of what I could trade it in for. and he wanted to look at some of the games as well as the gaming PC for me. I'm so happily tipsy and excited to find a new case, which if you've ever been to a Walmart with the case section, they're never in order and often causes you to bend down to look for things. There was a man looking at the cases, and I just said, "Excuse me, can I have those cases you're standing in front of?" He looked at me with a blank yet dirty look, nodded and stepped over. As I'm happily looking through the shelf about 5 minutes in, and this lady and what I assume are her 2 children approach me. Mind you, we're in the middle of the pandemic, and I'm thrown off by how close they are to me, with her baby that looks no older than 9 months. I step back, and she grabs my arm and says, "Oh my god, wow, I haven't seen you in forever. Look at that hair, wow." And her grip tightens. At this point, my heart is racing. My face gets so hot and I'm visibly scared. That's when my boyfriend says, "Everything okay, bae?" He looks at me equally concerned. I'm thinking to myself, does this lady know my mum? Who is she? Is she an old friend I don't remember? Mind you, I'm originally from Ohio. We have family here, but I don't know any of them that live in Tennessee. And my mum loves to brag about her kids, so I'm trying to shake this weird feeling, but her daughter keeps looking behind me. So I go around and she goes, "No, don't turn around, walk with me please, trust me." I don't know why, but she was genuine, so I followed her. We step over to the side by the baby clothes, which is still in front of the electronics, and she goes, "Baby, I'm so sorry to scare you, but there are 3 men surrounding you. They went by the laptops, talked, and then I noticed a guy taking photos and a video of you while you were bent over looking at the cases. The other man was the tall guy next to you, and I don't know where the third one went." All I can remember is this high-pitched ringing in my ear. My stomach flipped and I felt like I was going to be sick. I never knew what people meant when they say everything slowed down, but in that moment everything moved in slow motion, and I was freaked out to the point that I have no clue what she said after. It was as if I blacked out for a moment, and then quickly came to the realization that the family and my boyfriend were looking at me, visibly panicked. I turned around, and there he was. He was Hispanic, shorter than me, maybe 5'1", but he looked very much built and also looked to be in his 40s. The other man, who was white and maybe in his 40s, was 5'11". I'll never forget the dead blank rage that the Hispanic man's eyes showed. Like his first meal in 5 days had been stolen from under him, and he was ready to kill in order to have it back. They said something, both looked at me, looked back at each other, said something else and started to walk slowly towards us. At that point we all turned and headed for the register, and that's when I thanked my lucky stars because there were about 3 cops at the front of the store. By the time I rudely pushed past the people to get to the self-checkout with tears in my eyes and frantically repeating excuses to anyone who got in front of me, I looked back and saw them just standing there, but with a third guy. My heart sank as I wanted to pass out at that moment. I guess it looked like I was going up to the cops because they hightailed it once they saw me approach them. Me being high as hell and a black woman, I wasn't going to chance the cops turning this around on me because I was simply stoned and tipsy. My only thought was, get into the car, get to the gun, don't stop, run. My boyfriend said he could barely keep up with me, and at one point I grabbed his hand so tight he had to force the grip off because it felt like I was going to crush his hand. And before anyone bashes my boyfriend, I don't expect a man to be my savior. He isn't the angry confrontational type anyway. He is calm and level-headed. He wouldn't hurt a fruit fly unless I asked him to get rid of it for whatever reason. I just knew I was the target, and I was putting him at risk. I knew they could easily jump him, and one of them could overpower him after taking him out. I probably looked crazy halfway walking and running past everyone, but I didn't care. I wasn't going to become another missing sister. We made it to the car safely and peeled out of there. I've never seen him drive so fast. He is beyond careful and would never speed. We sat at a Sonic for about an hour to make sure we weren't being followed. We recounted everything that happened. I just couldn't believe we were both too tipsy to notice that I had become prey in somewhere as simple as Walmart. I've never felt so stupid and irresponsible in my life. I never want to experience that fear and panic again. I didn't even get a chance to thank the lady who pretty much saved us. Sometimes we talk about it. What if the lady didn't see what the guy was doing? Even if we catch on, there were 3 of them, and we only saw 2 at first. I think of the horrors. That night I had a nightmare that the man attacked us in the parking lot. The creepiest part of the dream was the 3rd man shoved me in the trunk. As I went to look at his face, all I could see was a featureless face. I woke up in tears that night, realizing I didn't get a clear look at his face. It took me nearly a month to enter the Walmart again. Since, I have moved states, and I've only been to Walmart once since moving here. To the creepy men that stalked me, upskirted me, and basically followed me, even though they knew I was around other people, I genuinely hope we all never meet again, because the gun I carry on my person now has 3 beautiful hallows that will enjoy meeting you all. I am a female, and this story takes place when I was 18. I was hanging out with my friend one day when we ended up at her house for the evening, where she ended up falling asleep. Unable to fall asleep myself, I was bored and decided I wanted to see my boyfriend at the time. I called him a bunch of times, but after getting no response, I decided I could wait no longer, and that I had to go at that very moment. Yet instead of waking up my friend, I had the brilliant idea of walking there, at night, 4 miles away, through long stretches of desolate road, to an area that was known to be crime-ridden. I know, possibly one of the dumbest things I've ever done, so after gathering up all my belongings, I headed out into the night. Now, as I'm making my way out of the town my friend lives in, I encountered the cops who stopped me and asked what I was doing. I remember feeling a sense of relief, as I had been increasingly feeling dread. I thought they would offer me a ride home, as they knew how far away it was, and the area I was going isn't great. After telling them why I'm out and where I'm going, they ask for my ID, which I hand over. After checking it, they hand it back and they pause. I remember that pause, because there was a feeling in the air, and I thought they must feel it too. It was just a feeling that something bad was going to happen. I recall even getting a flash of them reading the newspaper next morning with my missing picture in it. It was very weird. After the long pause, instead of helping me, they bid me good evening, and I went back on my way, trying to chalk up my feelings as imagination. Well, the first 3 miles were uneventful, but I continued to make my way through the night, finally getting closer to my destination. But this also meant I was going into the more dangerous parts of the area. Now, the road I was walking down was a main road, fairly heavier traffic, although less so later in the evening. Houses, apartments, and small businesses lined both sides of the streets. Well, as I was about 5 blocks away, I noticed the same van circling around. Immediately, this got my radar up, as I was already on edge and paying close attention to my surroundings. Well, as I was about halfway down that particular block I was walking, I noticed the same van had come up the side street in front of me and sat at the end of it not moving. There wasn't much traffic, so no real reason it should be just sitting there. Well, I stopped and waited because there was no way I was going to be walking up to this car so they could grab me. Obviously, at a standoff, the van eventually then turned left onto the main road and stopped by me. I continued to walk quickly by as a man rolled down the window and yelled, "Hey, do you need a ride?" I looked over and noticed there was also a woman in the passenger seat, looking at me expectantly. I did not check if there was anyone else in the back. Now, the thing about this area is that it was a heavy drug area, mainly crack and actual places you could drive up and buy it. Now, you grow accustomed to seeing drug addicts and their sunken, hollowed-out faces, so I know these were drugs without a doubt. Even so, I wasn't going to stick around and quickly shook my head and kept walking, quickening my pace and more eager to get home, my head on a swivel. After another 2 blocks, I see a different vehicle, a pickup truck now, stop by me, and it was the same man from earlier. This time he yells, "I got rid of her. Do you want to get in now?" We're now terrified, and knowing these people had ill intent. I mean, why are you in a pickup truck without that woman still looking for me? Especially if you're obviously a crackhead, which aren't known for their generosity. So now I'm really hauling ass trying to get away and speed walking. I don't pay that much attention to where he went exactly, as I'm happy to be coming up to the intersection that will take me to my home stretch, with a big hospital on the corner and also big concrete medians separating the lanes, which would make it impossible for a car to drive over to follow me. I knew this was my chance. My boyfriend lived across the intersection with a CVS on the corner and down the alley. I had a split-second decision. Do I run to the hospital and wait it out? Or do I go across and down the more main part of the street, or risk going through the CVS parking lot and down the alley? The alley, I knew, had a fence all along the side next to the houses, so I knew they couldn't chase me through the yards. I quickly surveyed the area, but didn't see the van near me, so I made my decision. I flew across the intersection, through the CVS parking lot, and ran like hell down the alley. I made it to my boyfriend's house, through the opening of the fence on the alley side, ran the yard and up the long back stairs to bring me to the second floor, to the only entrance at the back of the house, finally making it upstairs. Out of breath and still terrified, I stopped at the top. This area was completely closed in, and I could easily see, out at the alley, without being seen, well, like straight out of a nightmare. I looked down and saw the same van from the beginning, slowly driving down the alley, clearly looking for me. Whether they saw me run up those stairs, or were still continuing to look for me, I didn't know. I don't know what would have happened if they'd have ever caught me, but I'm relatively certain I wouldn't have made it out alive. About 10 years ago, I was 20 years old, going to college and trying to make a little extra money. I picked up a job working in Flint as a living caregiver for a 98-year-old woman called Lillian who had Alzheimer's. Honestly, I wasn't trained the way I should have been to properly care for her. I did a lot of research and tried my best to learn everything I could to make the situation as comfortable as possible for her. Needless to say, though, I did get frustrated sometimes. One of those times was a hot summer night around 2 a.m. I awoke to Lillian screaming from her bedroom. I ran to find her sitting in her laundry basket. After helping her up, I noticed that she had wet herself. I took her to the bathroom to get her cleaned up, and she told me she thought the laundry basket was the toilet, and after she sat in it, she couldn't get out. I felt so sorry for her. I tried my best to reassure her that it would be okay. I told her I would clean everything up, run her laundry again, and stay up the rest of the night in case she needed anything. Once Lillian fell back asleep, I threw her laundry in and decided I had time to sneak out for a quick cigarette. I decided to sit in my car and use the air conditioning to stay cool and call my best friend to see if she was still up, so that I could vent a little. I wanted to talk to someone as it was late at night and I was alone in my car. Being female, we're wired to be nervous about being alone at night, unfortunately. I hadn't been on the phone for more than 2 minutes when I got a strange feeling. Something was telling me to look over my shoulder, and when I did, I see a younger guy, maybe in his early 20s, walking down the sidewalk in my direction with a sweatshirt on and his hood up. Now remember, this is the middle of summer, so immediately I felt something was off. But who am I to say this guy isn't cold? One of my flaws is being too afraid to hurt people's feelings. I knew in that moment that I needed to lock my doors, but I didn't want this guy to hear the sound of my doors locking and feel like I thought he was a criminal for just walking down the sidewalk. My body is screaming warning signs at me. The hair on the back of my neck was standing on end, and it felt hard to breathe. I knew my friend was still talking, but I couldn't really hear a word she said. I was afraid to turn my head and see where he was. I was frozen. Suddenly, my friend's voice became clear to me. She was yelling, "Hey, why aren't you answering me? What's going on?" I turned my head to the right, just in time to see him reaching for the passenger door handle. Without even time to think, I managed to reach up with my left hand and hit the lock button for the doors, just as he began pulling for the handle. His right hand was right in front of the pocket of his sweatshirt. He seemed to have been holding onto something with his other hand. He was pulling at my handle with such force that the entire car was jerking back and forth. I didn't move, I didn't scream, I just watched him. I remembered his eyes staring into mine. He looked angry. Just as I started to think, this is it. He's going to get in somehow. He's going to hurt or kill me. He suddenly stops. He stood there for a quick second and then turned and ran away. In that moment, I burst into tears. I was scared, angry, and confused. What just happened? What was he trying to do? Kill me? Steal my car? Is he gonna come back? Lastly, even though I was happy with it, why did he suddenly stop and run away like that? I called 911, and the dispatcher asked me if there was any way for me to leave the area. I wanted to, but then I realized Lillian. I needed to get back to the house. I was terrified to step foot out of my car. I took a few deep breaths and decided I didn't have time to think about it. I needed to make sure she was okay. I got back into the house and immediately went to her room. She was sound asleep, and I felt a huge sense of relief take over. I took a walk through the house and checked all the doors and windows to make sure we were safe. Everything was secure. I sat on the couch in the living room in the dark and waited for the cops to come. For those of you who don't know much about Flint, this type of call is not their top priority. It took them 4 hours to respond. At that point, obviously, there was nothing they could do. He was long gone. I still think about that night more often than I'd like to. The what-ifs are the hardest part. All I know is I hope to never be in a situation like that again. I lock my doors as soon as I get into my car now, especially since I now work third shift in the same city. I was a small-town girl with little to no experience in the dangers of the area back then. I don't take any chances anymore, and I am much more aware of my surroundings at the time. The idea of keeping the windows rolled up is something I never thought about, but will do so from now on. Be safe out there, everyone. When I was about 12, I was friends with this girl, Becky. Becky's mum was really sweet, and she understood that at the time my home life wasn't ideal, so she would take me out on trips to go shopping. Now, being from a really small town, our idea of a shopping trip was to go to Walmart. It was me, Becky, Becky's mum, and another one of our friends. I remember I was looking at ties because I fancied myself as some sort of emo kid at the time. That's when a very old man beckoned for my attention. He looked to be in his 60s or 70s, liver spots, hunch, pure white hair, the works. He pulls out a wallet and kind of croaks out, "Excuse me, miss, but could you help me find the price of this wallet?" So of course I'm thinking I'll help this guy out because why not? So I teeter over, grab the wallet, and as I'm looking for the price, he leans over and whispers in my ear, "You're a sexy girl, you know that." I turn around, assuming that I must have been hearing things, and ask if he could repeat himself. He says it again and proceeds to grab my arm. I look and see that Becky and the others are now nowhere to be seen, so I bolt into a completely random direction. Eventually, I managed to find them at the front of the store, so I just waited for Becky's mum to find me. When she asked where I went, I explained, so we left pretty hastily. I don't think I've ever feared for my safety in such a way before. This happened around 20 years ago nearly. I was around 10. My family and I lived in a small town in southern New Mexico. The nearest Walmart was about a half-hour away in Roswell. Every weekend we would take a shopping trip to Roswell. When we arrived at the Walmart, which appropriately decorated with aliens and flying saucers, my dad and I both had to pee. I was using the urinal when an older man walked in and started using the one next to me. Then without warning, he leans over and looks right over the partition, and not even trying to be subtle, he just starts staring at my prepubescent penis. Luckily, my dad had been washing his hands when that happened, and he shouts at the guy, "Hey buddy, what do you think you're doing?" He barely manages to get out, and then without another word, he turns and rushes out of the bathroom, not bothering to wash his hands nor flush the toilet. My dad was fuming and immediately went to contact the manager about the old pervert ogling his kids in the bathroom. The manager, completely unfazed, told my dad it wasn't the first time the guy had done something like that, and that the old perv was on a list of people in Walmart that they kept an eye on when they entered the store, and that he was also a registered sex offender. It's so great that they couldn't do anything about it, right? This happened when my grandmother was in her mid-30s. We had a house close to the park. The second floor had a large balcony overlooking the park. It was in a quiet, older part of town, the kind of place where you knew your neighbors. My grandmother was at the balcony sitting in the sun when she saw something she would never forget. There were 2 women and a child approaching a bench near the park. One of them has the child by the hand, and the child was blindfolded, and the other woman was looking around checking the surroundings. They both appeared to be in their 30s. One of the women knelt and appeared to be saying something to the child. The child stood there blindfolded as the women walked away. My grandmother waited for a few minutes as she continued watching the child. She waited for a few more minutes and then rushed to the park. It was a young boy about 4 years old. My grandmother was a very loving woman, and she had 3 children of her own, so she immediately became very protective. The kid couldn't speak. She waited there at the park with him for about an hour and no one came back. She wanted to take care of him, but she also thought that what if someone's child had got kidnapped or was lost and they were looking for them? She contacted the authorities, but never found out what became of the child. It is also unknown who the 2 women were that just abandoned this boy in the park. It's a mystery that has never left my mind. I hope they're doing okay now. When I was in college, I was walking across campus to my early morning class when this old white man with the bluest eyes I've ever seen stopped me to ask for bus ticket money. Everything went still around us, no sounds, the air felt stiff, but there was no one but us outside. The man's eyes were like aquamarine, but the rest of his face, it's like his skin was plastered on. His nose looked like it had been glued on with clay. His cheeks looked like they were barely hanging on to whatever was underneath, and he looked truly bizarre. He stops me and compliments my lipstick and asks if I could help him pay with the bus ticket so that he could visit his son. I told him, regrettably, I didn't have any cash. He never broke eye contact with me and tells me he's a veteran and takes his wallet out to show me his military lapel. When he opens it, I see a wad of cash in there, and he looks at me again and asks if I could help. While all of this was happening, the only thing I felt was that I was in danger. I truly thought I was in the presence of someone evil, even though he didn't say or do anything to provoke the feeling. I ended up reaching in my bag for quarters and gave them to him. He held my hand for what felt like forever, and let me go on my merry way. I think about this encounter a lot, because I felt like he was almost pretending to be human. His skin looked like it was made out of wet clay and badly placed. His eyes were so blue they were unnatural, and why ask for money when you already have it? Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I really hope that you enjoyed tonight's video. I made a really big effort to try and find some top quality Let's Not Meet stories, so I hope they were up to scratch. A huge thank you as always to my members and patrons. I've actually just posted an exclusive story that I will never publish on the channel on there about a hitchhiking gone horribly wrong. If you want to hear that, well, you know where to check it out now. Members and Patreon section. Thank you all for listening. You know, just you guys sticking around to the end and listening to my videos, it really means the world to me. You guys are the best. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. But until next time, stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.